Hey everybody, Xile here, welcome back to the channel. I'm doing another one of these Xile rant videos, and I had some difficulty figuring out exactly which topic I wanted to cover. Originally I was planning on doing a video on Iran, but by the time I sat down to record it, the whole thing kind of fizzled out. Then I was considering a video about Jeffrey Epstein, but come on, everybody knew that there was no way the Trump administration would ever release any information on him because Trump himself is massively implicated in the whole situation. So yeah, if you seriously believe them when they said that they would release all the files, I have a wonderful opportunity for you in the form of my new cryptocurrency, Xcoin. It's definitely not a scam. Down below, click the link. Yeah, no. So eventually I settled on discussing the big beautiful bill that just passed about a week ago, because all of my videos up until this point have been decidedly focused on the executive branch, on Trump and his actions and the power of the president and the vice president, etc. But I haven't really discussed the legislative branch and the issues that plague America in terms of our Congress and Senate and so on. Also, as you can no doubt tell, I have changed up the formatting. We're not doing the whole here's a bunch of websites that I have linked and I just switch between the tabs. That was inefficient, and it wasn't really doing a very good job of providing visual aids, and it also wasn't doing a very good job of providing guidelines for myself. So I think now with this PowerPoint I'll be able to show visual aids and keep myself focused and on topic. So we're gonna try this out. Hopefully, this new format is effective. Okay, so what exactly are we talking about in this bill? So first, I'll go into what even is a bill? What kind of bill is this? How does a bill get passed? Stuff like that. I know most of you know that stuff, but it's important that we cover all of our bases. Then we'll go into the good news. There is some, positives with this bill. It's not all doom and gloom. I mean, it mostly is, but it's not all doom and gloom. Then we'll talk about everybody's favorite topic, the deficit, why it's a problem, why it's growing out of control. Yeah, that'll be a fun one. We'll talk about how this bill changes U.S. immigration policy. We'll talk about how this bill negatively affects you personally, you watching this video. How does this bill screw you over? And it does screw you over unless you are a millionaire. And then we'll talk about the long-term, meaning 10 years plus, ramifications of this bill and what I think, what future path America will head down because of this bill. Okay, the first thing we should note about this bill is that it is not a normal, typical, standard bill. The way a normal bill gets passed, first it needs to be proposed in a committee. Then if it passes through the committee, it gets proposed to the House of Representatives floor. Then if it receives a majority vote, then it will be passed the Senate. But that majority vote can be blocked through something called a filibuster, which takes a overwhelming majority, meaning 60 or 66%, in order to avoid. And so that was the fear, right, is that Democrats could just cause a filibuster, which would prevent any debate or discussion on the bill, and essentially they would run out the clock and it wouldn't be able to get passed. If it makes it through the House, then it goes to the Senate, and typically the House and the Senate will have two different versions of the bill because the Senate will make some tweaks, and then it goes back to the House one final time for those tweaks to be approved, and then it goes to the president's desk for it to be signed. Okay, that's how a bill normally works. But this bill is not a normal bill. This is what they call a budget reconciliation bill. So anything to do with money, right? Because Congress controls the purse strings in America. That is one of their chief primary functions, is to raise and distribute tax money. And somebody figured out that it would be very, very bad if a budget reconciliation bill, if the federal government being able to provide money to fulfill all of its duties would be able to be held up by a filibuster. So at some point, I think it was during the Obama administration, but I could be wrong about that, they changed the rules, and they said that now you just need a simple majority for a budget reconciliation bill. So that's why the Republicans were able to pass this bill without having a filibuster-proof majority, just a simple 50% majority. So because it's a budget reconciliation bill, it The only things that this bill is allowed to do is change how money is distributed. It can't like actually introduce new laws. That's why when I tried to read this bill, I did try to read the whole 970-page bill for this video, and I couldn't do it because the whole thing reads like this, like you see here on the left. It's all like modifications to already existing legislature. Because again, it can't create new laws. All it can do is change the laws that are already on the book, specifically in regards to their funding. And then after all this song and dance, after a huge back and forth of multiple Republican representatives saying they would support it, they won't support it, it grows the deficit too much. It doesn't grow the deficit enough. Finally, they were able to get the bill passed, and it was signed into law on the 4th of July, as you can see in this picture here on the bottom right. Hooray. Okay, so let's discuss some of the pros, some of the good things. Well, the first bit of good news is that arguably the two worst provisions in the entire bill were ultimately removed. The first was a ban on all state AI regulations for the next 10 years. If you're wondering why the Trump administration is so obsessed with AI and seems to be in bed with a bunch of Silicon Valley tech bro types, there's a whole conversation here to be had about what is being termed techno-fascism. I don't have time to get into that conversation in this video. When I make my fascism video, hopefully, sometime next year maybe, I will dedicate a whole section to that. But that's why. There's a lot of ideological interplay here going on kind of behind the scenes. Okay, and obviously that would have been terrible because AI is already like causing, millions of people to lose their jobs. And if we leave it without regulations for the next 10 years, who knows, we could have like a Skynet situation in our hand, or I don't even know what could happen. It would be bad is the point. We need regulation. We shouldn't just unleash this tech and say consequences be damned and, just let the market run its course. I think that'd be a terrible idea. And then the other big provision that was removed was the sale of millions of acres of public land. So you can see on this chart down here at the lower right hand corner, this was all of the land that was being proposed to be sold. Most of it falls under the Bureau of Land Management, and then a lot of it also follows under the U.S. Forest Service. So that's things like national forests, stuff like that. And then the Bureau of Land Management, when the western states especially were settled, the federal government actually kept a hold of a lot of the land to use it as nature preserves, scientific research, or just to prevent America's natural beauty from being completely desecrated. So this bill, in its original form, would have allowed a lot of this public land to be sold to private corporations to be mined and logged and exploited and polluted and, whatever. And luckily that was prevented. If this had gone through, it would have essentially spoiled the natural beauty of the entire western half of the country for your children and grandchildren. They would grow up in a world without like Yellowstone National Park, or being able to go to Redwood Forest and see the big redwood trees. It would have been catastrophic. The other good news is, if you live in Alaska, thanks to some hard bargaining on the part of your representative, you're immune from the worst of the Medicare and SNAP cuts. In exchange for her voting for the bill, she was able to negotiate that the harshest cutbacks to Medicare and Medicaid and SNAP programs don't affect Alaska pretty much at all. So, if you live in the rest of the country, you should be pissed that this person took what was essentially a not so subtle bribe or backroom deal in order for her to support this bill. But that's politics. That's the way it's worked for all of human history. So I can't really get too mad. Yeah, good stuff, Alaska. And then the one that you've probably heard a lot about is the no taxes on tips and overtime, which is true and is going to improve your income if you do work a lot of overtime or you work in a restaurant or something. But there's a big asterisk attached to that point. That provision of the bill expires after 2028. Now, everybody, let's all put on our thinking caps. What else happens in 2028? I'll give you a second to think about it. Oh, that's right. That's when the next presidential election is. So after they hope they can win the next presidential election, they don't have to worry about appealing to the working class anymore. So those provisions go bye-bye. It's honestly kind of genius. I don't know why more people haven't done this in the past. I'm impressed with how ruthlessly politically efficient it is. But obviously, it's not good for you. Okay, and then the last part is the baby bonus. They're expanding the child, I think, tax credit that you get. This will help. They're expanding the child tax credit, but they're also building a. It's kind of like a 401k, but for your child, I guess. Like once your baby is born, you can put a certain portion of your income into like a fund that is investable and is tax-free, and that fund will grow and grow, hopefully, unless the entire economy crashes. And then by the time your child is 18 and wants to go to college, you can use that money to pay for college tuition. I actually like this. I think that's like a really smart idea, and I think it will hopefully encourage people to have more kids. So yeah, I actually like that provision. All right, now we got to talk about the deficit. Okay, so first, what is a budget deficit? So the federal government raises money through taxes and it spends money to provide services. If the government spends more money than it raises in taxes, it has to borrow the difference. We call the sum total of all of that money that the federal government has borrowed the budget deficit, or the federal deficit. Right now, the federal deficit stands at about $34 trillion, which is a lot of money. Now, for my entire life, politicians have been arguing, the deficit's too high. Oh, we gotta lower the deficit. Oh, we gotta, stop. We gotta gut Social Security so we can lower the deficit. Yeah. I've heard the same song and dance replayed time and time again, and yet the deficit only continues to grow exponentially. Actually, if you look at this graph down here at the bottom left, that is the exponential growth. The trend line there is exponential growth of the federal deficit. It is also a commonly held myth that because the Republican Party is theoretically the party of small government, that they are more conservative when it comes to the budget, meaning they don't spend as much money and they contribute to the deficit less. This is simply not true. If we look at this graph up here, this is the percent increase of the federal deficit by presidential term, and we can see that the Republicans mostly, for the most part, far outdo their Democratic counterparts. The last administration to actually balance the federal budget, meaning we took in more tax revenue than we spent, was Bill Clinton. And the only president that bucks this trend is the most recent one, Joe Biden, in which he did actually, yes, increase the deficit as a percent, I think, more than Donald Trump. But of course, we had COVID to deal with, but still, he did actually do that. Yeah. So anytime you hear a Republican politician say, we can't expand Medicare or Medicaid because the deficit, we can't feed hungry kids because the deficit, yada, 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 because the deficit, they're always bullshitting. They're always lying. They don't actually care about the deficit. I mean, a couple of them do, like Ron Paul, like the actual libertarians, all three of them that are left, they actually do care. But the vast majority of people in the Republican Party just say that shit so that they can argue against Democrats providing you with good things. They don't actually care the fact that the country's spiraling into massive amounts of debt. And this bill is proof of that. This bill will only make the federal deficit worse. The federal deficit is expected to grow by $3 to $4 trillion over the course of the next 10 years. This is bad because, remember, we still have to pay interest on all of this debt that we're accruing. So the more debt we accrue, the more interest we have to pay. Then we have to borrow more money to pay off the interest. Then we have to pay interest on that money we just borrowed, and the whole thing is like a self-fulfilling prophecy, positive feedback loop that just spirals and spirals and spirals until we default, and then that's GG for the American economy, basically. Yeah. One of the reasons that we've let things get this far is because of this idea of modern monetary theory. Now, I do not have time to explain every single tenet of modern monetary theory. In my opinion, though, modern monetary theory is copium. It is absolutely not true. It is basically just a philosophical argument that has no bearing in the real world, that everybody has just used for the past 20 years in order to prevent any actual action being taken on decreasing the federal deficit. What modern monetary theory says is that it doesn't actually matter if the budget deficit grows, as long as the GDP grows with it. Okay? So as long as the GDP grows faster than the actual budget deficit, everything will be okay. But this is BS. We've seen this be BS, because debt is often measured in terms of debt to GDP ratio. The debt to GDP ratio. You hear that phrase repeated the most often. And at the beginning of my life, the American debt to GDP ratio was, I think it was 65, 70%. And then a short, less than 30 years later, we are now at 120%. So the entire size of the federal deficit is 1.2 times the entire American economy. Okay, which is bad. We're not especially for an economy as big as ours, 120% is still survivable. We can still recover from that. But if things get any bigger, we're going to start hitting the danger zone where it's going to be effectively impossible to ever pay off any of this debt. And that's going to have disastrous consequences in the long run. Okay, so where does all this money actually go? Well, a lot of it's going to the Pentagon. So they raised the budget of the Defense Department by $150 billion to $1 trillion. Yeah, I don't know what Mr. No New Wars needs $1 trillion in military equipment for. Your guess is as good as mine. I mean, obviously it's to, make all of his Lockheed Martin buddies a quick buck, but what do I know? Yeah, I mean, it is ridiculous. I thought the whole point of not getting involved in foreign wars and entanglements was so that we could decrease our Pentagon budget, but here we are, massively increasing it. It just doesn't make sense. The whole thing's just a way to funnel money into the military-industrial complex, but what else is new? The wealthier you are, the more money you save. So down here we have a chart of all the money that you'll save, depending on your income tax bracket. Technically, everybody will save money. But if you then factor in all the money that you lose from losing access to entitlements to welfare programs, which we'll cover here in a second, if you're in the bottom, say 35% of income earners, you will definitely feel the hurt. You will definitely be losing money. But hey, if you're in the top 1%, you can save an extra $66,000 a year. Yippee! You definitely needed that money, right? You're definitely going to reinvest that money into the economy, right? No. And just as a little nice treat, you can now write off your private jets and your yachts as business expenses and tax deductible. Yay! All right, and then we get to the second largest increase in terms of budget, the $165 billion now being allocated to the Department of Homeland Security to enforce Trump's immigration policy. I remember back during 9/11, or the immediate aftermath of 9/11, where they were trying to get the Department of Homeland Security established, right? The Department of Homeland Security is the newest federal department, unless you count DOGE, which I don't because it's illegal. And I remember there were a few, not many, but there were a few people who said that we shouldn't establish, the Department of Homeland Security because that will lead to authoritarianism, it will lead to fascism, it will lead to masked men breaking down doors, it will lead to concentration camps, and lo and behold, here we are. So, what is this $165 billion going to be spent on? Some of it is going to be spent on constructing a border wall, like he promised to do in his first term and never actually did. So, we'll see if that actually happens. And then a lot of it is going to building concentration camps. I don't have time to play this semantic game of it's not a concentration camp, it's just a migrant detention facility. Why are you freaking out so much? No, it is a concentration camp. It is definitionally a place to take people from around the country, put them all in one place so that you can either never let them go or deport them to another country. It is definitionally a concentration camp. Now, is it a death camp? Not so far. I don't think there has been the infrastructure. I don't think the purpose of these camps is to kill people. But as time goes on, that might change. Why they chose the Florida Everglades for their test pilot of this new program is just so dumb. Oh my god. One hurricane comes through and all those tents are just getting blown away. The whole place is going to flood after a light rainfall. They just wanted the name, the nomenclature of Alligator Alcatraz, and the actual logistics of running and operating this facility were just kind of ignored and brushed aside like everything that goes on in this administration. So that's awesome. And then because of all this money that's now flowing into the Department of Homeland Security, now there's a concentration camp coming to a town near you. So I expect that they'll probably build, dozens more of these throughout the United States. How awesome. By the way, another element of the Department of Homeland Security was Guantanamo Bay, and they opened Guantanamo Bay, and Obama said he'd get it closed, and Trump said he'd get it closed, and it's never been closed. That's how these concentration camps are going to go, right? So they're being built now, ostensibly to deport, illegal, violent alien criminals. But what happens when all of those quote-unquote illegal, violent alien criminals are deported? Are they just going to tear them down? Are they going to say, well, job done? They'll just pat themselves on the back and go back to doing whatever it is they were doing? No, of course not. These camps aren't going away. Once you introduce an element of state oppression, of state authoritarianism, it doesn't just fade out into obscurity. It stays, right? It becomes institutionalized. It doesn't just slide back into the shadows. So once all the criminals are gone, they'll start going after, and they already have gone after, just regular immigrants, right? I think 75% of all immigrants, or all people, I should say, detained by ICE have never even committed a single crime, much less a violent crime. So obviously the whole violent criminal thing is complete horseshit. And then, once they run out of brown people to deport, they'll just go after political opponents, or trans people, or gay people, or whoever the hell they want. Because the fear is the point. The boot is the point. They want you to be afraid. They want you to not speak out and risk being sent to one of these facilities. And then a lot of this money is also going to the agents who are going to enforce these mandates. They're about going to double the number of ICE agents who are essentially they're just recruiting them straight from white nationalist organizations, from the Proud Boys, organizations like that, and just giving them a gun and a cheap tactical vest that they bought at Target and saying, go have fun, be home by 10. They're giving them free reign to break down doors and arrest basically whoever they want, as long as they're not white and have their passport on them at all times. They can basically arrest and detain whoever they want, U.S. citizen or no, legal or illegal immigrant, doesn't matter. Your ass is getting sent to the camps. So that's great. But I know what you may be thinking. I'm not an immigrant. I don't care about the deficit. So why should I care about this bill? Well, I'm going to tell you how this bill screws you, the person watching this video, over. So right off the bat, we have $930 billion cut to Medicaid, which will effectively uninsure 11 million Americans. That is a huge, huge portion of the total amount of people in this country. Some of this is through the introduction of work requirements. Now, you may be thinking, well, isn't it perfectly reasonable that a person who is receiving money from the government contributes to society or contributes to the economy in some way by holding a job? You might think that's a perfectly reasonable requirement to have, but there's a couple things wrong with that. First of all, what if you can't work? What if you live in a town that's been hollowed out by deindustrialization? What if you're disabled? What if you are temporarily disabled? You have an accident and you can't go back to work, you know? That's just the tip of the iceberg. The real damage from work requirements is that it adds an entire extra layer of bureaucracy that a lot of people just don't have time or the resources to manage, right? Because once you introduce work requirements, well, now you have to check in with an officer or somebody every 6 months. You have to fill out paperwork. You have to get paperwork from every job you ever held. You have to backdate it. Like, there's all kinds of hoops now that you have to jump through in order to get the health care that you are entitled to, and a lot of people just simply can't do that. So there's been studies on this, and the amount of people who are negatively affected by work requirements for Medicaid, only like 5% were actually because they didn't have a job. The other 95% were just because of these bureaucratic hurdles. So, and all of that's not to say the moral and ethical implications of saying you have no value to society, you don't deserve to live unless you're working, which I think is, ridiculous. And then there's just a bunch of straight up rewriting tweaks that ultimately drain another further about $500 million from Medicaid. And you might be thinking, I'm not on Medicaid, so what the hell do I care? Well, if you live in any city, any county with less than, say, 30, 40,000 people, you might have one or two local small rural hospitals in your little hamlet, in your town. And a lot of the people in your community probably are on Medicaid. But if they can't use that Medicaid to then get treatment from the hospital can't make any money. So the hospital now has to close. So it's also estimated that thousands of clinics and hospitals across the country, especially in rural areas, will close because of these Medicaid cuts. So, have fun next time you break your leg driving 2 hours to get to the big city because the nearest hospitals to you have all closed. And then there's also about $300 billion in cuts to SNAP. This is the the largest food assistance program in America. I think the especially egregious one is the fact that they're cutting free school lunches for children in a lot of cases. I think that is so not only morally reprehensible, but like economically, it doesn't make any sense, right? The way you progress as an economy is by getting better educated people and people who are more qualified to do more complicated jobs. You can't educate a child if they're hungry, okay? It just can't work. If they're more focused on their day-to-day survival, trying to, teach them the quadratic formula, it's not going to happen. So I think that it's just hatred. Like there's no even economic justification for this. They just hate poor people and they want you to die, basically. I mean, it sounds crazy, but at this point, I don't know what else to think. And then, of course, there's also all of the actual adults who are going to be cut off of food stamps or have them dramatically reduced. And these two policies combined are going to lead to tens of thousands of people dying. There's no way to sugarcoat that. There will be mass death in this country because of these two policies right here. So I hope you got what you voted for, and I hope it's not your grandma or your neighbor or your cousin or whatever who dies because of this. And then another big one is the end of the clean energy tax credits. So there was a boom. So because of the Inflation Reduction Act signed under the Biden administration, there was a boom in U.S. renewable energy. I mean, they were building solar fields in Nevada, in Maine, in California, everywhere. Texas even was building solar fields. Windmills were going up like crazy. I mean, there was so much infrastructure being built in terms of clean energy investment. And clean energy investment benefits everyone. Everybody in the country benefits from cheaper electricity. Okay? There isn't a single person in this country, except for the fossil fuel lobbies and the fossil fuel companies, that doesn't benefit from clean energy and renewable energy and cheaper electricity. But guess who pays the Republicans to lobby against clean energy? That's right, it's the fossil fuel companies. So this is already costing, thousands, tens of thousands of people their jobs. Yeah, if you're an electrician in Maine, you're just getting completely screwed by this. It's nasty, nasty stuff. The EV vehicle tax credit, I'm okay with that because Teslas are giant piles of political animus right now. So that I'm fine with. But the clean energy tax credits themselves, no, I think that's a terrible. It's like there was a Byzantine emperor, Byzantine Empire being the successor to the Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, if you will. There was an emperor named Leo the Wise, and Leo the Wise was regarded as one of the best Byzantine emperors, certainly in like the top 5, right? And he passed many, many policies that strengthened and helped the empire prosper. But then when he died, because he didn't have a son, which is a whole another complicated series of drama, his brother took over. His brother Alexander took over. And Alexander reversed almost all of Leo the Wise's policies. Not because they were bad, not because he disagreed with them, but simply because his brother was the one that passed him and he hated his brother. This is the equivalent of that in the modern day. Trump doesn't actually know or care who this rollback is going to hurt. He just doesn't like the fact that Biden did it, so he's just going to reverse course. And then the last major change with this is they are now capping the amount of money that you can take out through student loans. I guess somebody figured out that, hey, having trillions upon trillions of dollars of people of student loan debt from the people who are struggling the hardest in this country, young people who are having the most difficulty of any demographic paying it off. Maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe that's not sustainable. We should put a cap on it to ensure that we get our money back. But of course, again, this is going to negatively affect the availability of doctors, lawyers, engineers, computer programmers, anything that requires a college degree. This is going to negatively affect the supply of those jobs, and this is going to dramatically decrease social mobility in the United States, right? So if you're rich, you can already pay for your kids to go to college, but if you're poor, now your kids are going to have a harder time going to college, and thus their pathway to the middle class is being closed, is being suffocated, essentially. Okay, so what are the long-term ramifications of this bill? Like, what does the future hold for America now that this bill is passed? Well, I don't want to sound hyperbolic here, but I think this is basically the end of the country. I think that the possibility that we pay off our debts is gone. There's absolutely no way that that is ever going to happen. And any politician who tries to pay off the debt by cutting any number of federal programs or raising taxes, it's going to be so politically unviable because of the wave of populism that's coming that it would be political suicide to even suggest a thing. So we're basically in an infinite debt spiral now that can only lead to collapse, ruin, starvation, devastation. Yeah, it'll be super ugly. The other big effect of this is the splintering of the right wing in this country. Now, again, it is pretty much inevitable that as soon as a coalition wins a big election, they immediately start infighting amongst themselves. We saw this most prominently with Obama's win in 2008, where once he won, the progressives and the moderate and the Democratic Party immediately began bickering with each other. The same thing is happening now, except the difference now is that Elon Musk has taken a large chunk of the Republican base out of the Republican Party. He's trying to start his own political third party. He's calling it the America Party. The irony of a South African starting a party called the American Party is certainly there. It is also ironic because there used to be an America Party in this country, and they were nicknamed the Know Nothing Party because anytime you asked a member of the American Party what the policy stood for, what they believed in, they would say, "I know nothing about what you're talking about." So they were nicknamed the Know Nothing Party, which is also apt, I think. And of course, the main policy goal of the Know Nothing Party was anti-immigrant. That was their whole platform historically. But do I think this party is really going to go anywhere? Well, Elon Musk does have a lot of influence. He owns Twitter. He's the richest man on earth. But people just don't like him. I mean, it's as simple as that. People don't like him. People don't respect him anymore. He shot himself in the foot through Doge. He's been dragged through the mud by the left and the right recently so many times that I think he's just lost all credibility in the eyes of everyone except his most loyal simps and the people he just gives money to. So no, I don't think this party. I'd be shocked if they even win a single seat. Okay, I don't think they'll win anything. But what they will do is they will cost Republicans, probably 10 to 20 seats in the Senate and House of Representatives in swing areas. That I could definitely see playing a role. Because hey, even if they only get 10% of the vote, that's 10% less votes going towards the Republican candidate. I already mentioned that this will cause, mass death. I don't think that's controversial to say. I think that is just an objective, cause-effect relationship. You cut welfare to people, they starve to death. It's very simple. And then another big thing with this bill is the funneling of money from the lower class to the upper class. This has been a recurring theme in Republican administrations and American history in general. We kind of go through cycles of this, right? So, for example, in the Gilded Age, it was a very, very unequal time. This was about 1880s through 1910s, 1920s. It was very, very unequal. You had giant oligarchs like Andrew Carnegie or the Rockefellers or Vanderbilt who owned these vast, vast trusts, these conglomerates, and the average working American had no minimum wage, no work safety protections, was essentially getting screwed 6 ways from Sunday. And then the New Deal came around, and they increased the tax rate on the wealthiest of Americans massively, and the gap between the rich and the poor during the Second World War and immediately after the Second World War was the lowest it has ever been in American history. You'll often see boomers get all nostalgic about the 50s and stuff and how great things were. Yeah, things were so great because we actually, taxed the rich and had strong social welfare programs. Imagine that. But then, because of Ronald Reagan and welfare queens and a bunch of not so subtle racism, he was able to convince the white working class that it doesn't matter if they benefit from Social Security, it doesn't matter if they benefit from welfare, as long as the blacks, the browns, the Jews, the gays benefit more, then it's bad and we should get rid of it. And that's how they essentially led to the situation we're in today, which is shown very nicely in this graph here at the bottom left. This measures the Gini coefficient. The Gini coefficient basically looks at the fraction owned by the top 10% of the country versus the bottom 90%. I believe that's the distribution. I could be wrong about that. But that ratio, that fraction is measured here. As we can see, it steadily increases all throughout Reagan's term in the 80s, jumps sharply in the 90s, and then steadily increases a little bit more. And this graph ends in 2017. And I guarantee you that since COVID, this Gini coefficient has exploded massively, because one of the things that COVID did was it destroyed a lot of small businesses, which allowed a lot of big businesses to capitalize on their market share even more. So this Gini coefficient is even higher now than it is in the past, in 2017, and higher than it's ever been even like during the Gilded Age. This is the highest Gini coefficient we've had in almost any society in human history. It is so massive, the disparity between the rich and the poor. It is even higher, in fact, than the Gini coefficient experienced during the French Revolution. And we all know what happened during the French Revolution. The poor revolted against their aristocratic monarchical overlords. And, it wouldn't surprise me if, because of this growing tension in America, something similar happens very, very soon. So, yeah, in conclusion, go out, buy food, water, supplies, because it won't be long before things get pretty freaking ugly. Thanks for watching. I hope that was at least mildly entertaining. I hope you like the new format. I am working on Why Trump Won Part 4, so stick around and stay tuned for that. Thank you all for the support, and I will see you on the flip side.